I know there are many of you in our audience listening today who want to be stronger. You want to build muscle, and you need to know how to do that in your home gym. Well, today's special guest, Brad Loomis, is going to teach us how to do exactly that. Brad is a head coach at 3D Muscle Journey, and he was an amateur bodybuilder from 1998 to 2008, earning his pro card with the WNBF. He's also a power lifter where he has landed national level podium placements in multiple weight classes. As a coach, Brad emphasizes client centered programming. He wants to meet the client where they're at, and he spends a lot of time helping them articulate their goals and the plan on how to attain those goals. This was such a great and enlightening conversation. He actually said a protocol or a technique in lifting that I'm going to be implementing in an upcoming workout. So make sure you keep an eye out for that and follow us over on YouTube for all of our workouts. But today, let's welcome Brad to the podcast. Well, Brad, welcome to the podcast today. So glad to see you.
Thank you for having me, Tracy. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I read somewhere that you take hours to tailor a plan to each person that you work with. I would love to know what your process looks like there, and how do you balance someone's goals with some of these real life constraints that we have?
Yeah, that is a great question. And yeah, thank you for recognizing that because I do take pride in really spending quality time with basically each and every client that hires us as coaches here at 3D Muscle Journey. So the process basically starts out, I feel like I've got a fairly efficient process of onboarding new clients.
Hmm.
And so obviously getting, kind of information to the client for what it is that they can expect. So that we really hit the ground running. The key piece to hitting the ground running once we get all that information to them, I've got to meet with them. We
Hmm.
spend a good hour and a half, almost a minimum. And I tend to, as you and your listeners are going to find out, I tend to ramble a little bit. I'm a little bit too talkative at times. But it's a minimum 90 minutes that I spend with the client on a call. Starting out, basically, clients a lot of times are they're given the pulpit, so to speak. I like
Hmm.
to hear from them. So I start out, how'd you hear about us at 3D Muscle Journey? What do you know about us? It gives us kind of a starting point so that I know what they know about us, and then I'm not preaching from the choir and telling them stuff that they already know about us.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then it's context, 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 context. What is your training age? What have you done over the last few years? That context helps me to customize
Hmm.
a plan and protocols to them because obviously I'm not going to put together a program for somebody that's been training for 20 years that looks anything like somebody that's been at it for a year, you
That's right.
know?
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, getting as much context as possible. And then, of course, what are their goals? And sometimes they don't know, but sometimes it's okay, I want to compete on the bodybuilding stage or the powerlifting platform in 2 years from now. Okay, well, let's go ahead and start doing things now that move us toward that goal.
Hmm.
Others, it's just, you know what? I feel like I'm floundering. I want to do this thing, but I don't know how to start and where to point things. And so sometimes it's just a matter of establishing a baseline and getting going from there. But that's kind of in a nutshell what the process looks like. What do they know about us? What is the context? What is your goal? And okay, now let's start putting a plan together that moves us from where we are now to that goal.
Hmm. Goals are just so important. I'd love to hear how you, yeah, interview them in terms of what their goal is specifically, because I think a lot of people will just move daily. And part of that is fine if that is the goal, right? If the
Hmm.
goal is just to get the body moving, then that's great. But if you have a specific goal of building muscle, losing body fat, conditioning, whatever it is, that's going to change everything, isn't it?
Hmm. Yeah. If the goal is very specific, we want to step onto the powerlifting platform, the bodybuilding stage, a photo shoot. In my mind, we want to start now, moving us toward that goal now. And so we're going to do very specific things moving them toward that goal. If
Hmm.
it's a long time frame, we might start building muscle, and in that case, We need to do things to start building muscle now. We need to make sure we're not losing any body weight, maybe even gaining a little bit of weight if we can afford to do that. We need
Hmm.
to start, if it's the powerlifting platform, we want to start getting stronger now in those specific lifts that they're lifting, on the powerlifting platform. However, if it's the other end of the spectrum, and it's a little bit more vague, and it's just, I just want to get in shape. Okay, well, let's identify what is in shape for you. Is it a look?
Right.
Is it a performance standard? Is it,
Right.
what is that thing that is your definition of in shape? And now let's start taking baby steps,
Hmm.
and doing things now that move us toward that goal. Because yeah, sometimes goals are not, very specific, and we just need to, first of all, determine what that goal is. And if it is a little bit vague, maybe just doing the things that move us toward that goal will help us identify that goal as time goes on. And let's face it, sometimes goals they change, sometimes they
Yeah.
shift.
Yeah.
You know what? I thought
Seasons.
I wanted to do this bodybuilding thing, but I found out it's not really what it was all cracked up to be.
Hmm.
I'm dedicating, like you mentioned before, time. I'm
Hmm.
dedicating way too much time to this thing, and I just can't afford to dedicate this kind of time right now. Well, okay,
Hmm.
you know what? Let's just back off of that. Let's just do things that are keeping the structure, keeping the good things in place, but we're going to give up and make concessions with this and that and that and that, so that we're still moving forward, but we've just kind of changed direction a little bit. Instead of moving north, now we're kind of moving north northeast or north
Yeah.
northwest.
Yeah. Most of our listeners are north of 50, speaking of north. And so often I feel like they just want change so quickly. I like that you said people, we want to hit the ground running. So that's why having a plan is important. But we want to see change quickly. Can we expect to see in terms of muscle growth, change, maybe when we're a seasoned lifter over 50, maybe when we're a newbie over 50? What can we expect to see and how long does it really take?
Yeah, good question. And you're asking the right person being north of 50, right?
Right. Me too. I'm with you.
But when you're north of 50 and you're a newbie, it's really
Hmm.
not that different when you're in your 20s or your 30s and you're north of 50. You can expect some pretty noticeable changes pretty quickly, simply because our bodies are not used to the new
Hmm.
stimulus that we're providing them. The body is an incredible adaptive machine, and it doesn't matter if it's exercise or, God forbid, smoking. You start that new thing, you get
Hmm.
immediate noticeable changes. If it's on the unhealthy part and you start smoking, you poke on that cigarette, you cough a little bit, you hack, immediately you get that
Hmm.
calm that just sets in and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so relaxed, right? After a while, now it takes a pack of cigarettes to get that same feeling, two packs,
Hmm.
etc., right?
Hmm.
With exercise, it's kind of the same thing. You just start lifting baby weights, right? Weights that are heavy to you, but when you compare to other people, you're like, yeah, these are baby weights. Almost within days, those baby weights get lighter. And then you've got to get a little bit heavier weight on there. Within days, those weights are lighter, right? So if you're north of 50, maybe the weights are just a little bit lighter than if you were in your 20s. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? But you can still expect some pretty noticeable changes almost immediately. Now, seasoned lifters like
Hmm.
yourself, like me,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Now we have to be a little bit more patient, and we have to make sure that we get in the way of the 20, 30-year-old in our heart that is ready to get things happening like they did back then,
Right.
right? And so
Right.
now me, I'm just coming off of a competition season. I've lost a bunch of weight. I'm arguably fragile because I'm so lean, so low in
Mhm.
body. I look great, don't get me
Yeah.
wrong,
I've seen,
but
yes.
you really are. You're kind of
Yeah.
fragile. And I'm in this state now where it's like, okay, right now it's not about getting this quick response. It's basically about doing what I know that I can do, make it challenging, but then just rinsing and repeating.
Mm.
It's
Hmm.
very akin to those old Russian strength programs where they would just make a challenging workout, but doable, right? It's challenging, but very doable. And we just do it twice a week and we rinse and repeat it for 10 weeks. What was
Yeah.
challenging at the beginning after 10 weeks is now it's pretty easy.
Hmm.
We actually probably have actually progressed to where that challenging workout that we started with, now we're actually doing that in a little bit more. That's kind of when you're a seasoned lifter and you're in you're north of 45, 50, 55 years old. Now
Hmm.
it's just more about the progression that you could expect when you're younger being the outcome of your training. Now
Hmm.
we're just daily doing the things that we know we need to do. We're sticking to our program, whatever. Each and every time it's challenging, but we stick to the program. We do those things, and lo and behold, 5, 10 weeks down the road, we're stronger, we're better, we've progressed. It's been an outcome kind of based program as opposed to um, programming progression into the plan.
Hmm. I would love to talk really in depth about progressive overload. So you just mentioned it a little bit right there on how to progress with the weights over time. Now, the majority of our audience are people who exercise in their homes. So we've got some limited equipment. Most people have a bench, some bands, a variety of dumbbells. But of course, a lot of us have goals and targets, and maybe the only place that we can work out is our home.
Mm.
How can we go about structuring a progressive overload program? And I'd love you just to get right into the nitty gritty here for us in order to build muscle.
When it comes to progressive overload, it's structure that's important.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that we are progressing in some way, shape, or form over time. That doesn't mean daily
Okay.
necessarily. That doesn't mean weekly necessarily. It's the structure that's important. So when you're training at home and you've got bands and you're starting with bands or you're starting with light dumbbells or even just body weight stuff, like I talked about before, especially if a lot of your listeners are lifters that are in their plan and they're doing the things that they need to do, there's nothing, it's boring, don't get me wrong, but there's nothing wrong with executing your plan at the frequency that you've got over the course of a month, right?
Hmm.
And then, of course, over the course of the month, maybe now, oh, I can go pick up a new band that's got a little bit more resistance. It's a little bit thicker band, right? If we have adjustable dumbbells, we can pick up a couple of extra plates and we can just add those plates to our existing dumbbells, right? If it's body weight exercises that you're doing, we can add load through ankle weights and wrist weights and weighted vests and things like that, right? And then we do that for a month. And then over the course of that month, maybe we can pick up another band. We can pick up more plates. We can get the little weights that you stick in the weighted vest that make the vest a little bit heavier. We can get more ankle weights and more wrist weights so that we've just now added a little bit more load, and we do that for a month, right? But progression and that's progressive overload, right?
Hmm.
We're overloading the muscle beyond what it's used to. There's other forms of progression that are effective without necessarily adding load. So we talk about intensifying techniques or intensity techniques. What are these techniques? Well, okay, so we've got a dumbbell that we've mastered. We have really mastered the weight of this dumbbell on a particular exercise, and we're getting tons and tons of repetitions.
Hmm.
Yes, adding load is a way to now make that mastery of that load a little bit tougher. And now we've got a new challenge, a new load that we need to master. But we don't necessarily have to add load. These intensity techniques that we're talking about, one of my favorites, especially for people that are the older population or just people that have issues with their joints. They can
Hmm.
handle this load, but man, I go up 5, 10 pounds and that
Yeah.
it aggravates that joint. It aggravates
Yeah.
that little nagging injury that we've got there. Well, okay, you know what? All we need to do then is stick with the load that doesn't bother us, stick with the load or the band or whatever, the load that we have at home that's existing to us. And we just need to keep the rest periods very short in between
Hmm.
these sets.
Hmm.
And so we this was kind of made popular what was called DC training or dog crap training. They're called cluster sets. You do your first set, you exhaust the muscle, you exhaust the exercise that it is that you're doing. You put it down, you get a drink of water, you shake it out, you get 5 breaths of air, boom, you're right back at it again. What you've done is by cutting down that rest period, you've essentially stayed in the pocket. You've stayed in that little sweet
Yep.
spot
Yep.
where the muscle's already kind of been worked. It's kind of been worked to its limit. But now it feels heavier. It feels
Hmm.
like we've added load, right? Because we have just finished that one. We've just given the muscle just enough time to recover, and then we're right back at it again. Especially if the quality of the reps is there, that repetition is going to look the exact same as the previous repetitions. It's just going to look a little bit slower. It's going to look like you've added load. You finish that
Hmm.
set. Okay, quick drink of water, 5 breaths of air, shake it out, go right back to it again for a third time. Okay. There's an intensity technique that is in my opinion almost as equal to adding load. You just made it harder.
Right.
So if you've mastered push-ups and you can do 20, 25 push-ups, right? Well, do 20, 25 push-ups, cut the load down or cut the rest period down, do it again.
Hmm.
It feels just like you've added load, right? And speaking of push-ups, there's a lot of ways to make exercise harder without using even intensity technique. Just slow the rep down.
Hmm.
Really fight it on the eccentric portion. When you're lowering the load, if it's a curl, for example, when you're lowering, just let it go slow, fight it on the way down. Get a little pause at that full eccentric. Boom, bring it up again on the concentric, come right back down. You're going to find that if you were traditionally moving that load in the repetitions that are kind of traditional and you instantly slow down the eccentric to make it harder, it's going to feel heavier. You're going to get less repetitions. Now you've progressed and you can build that up again. If it's a
Hmm.
push up, stick your butt up in the air a little bit. Go from an on your knees push up to an on your feet kind of military. You just made it harder.
Yeah.
So those are all kind of available and at your disposal. And it's so freeing when it's like, oh, I don't have to add load. I don't have to go get new equipment. I don't have to go get new plates. I just slow down the eccentric. I just cut down the rest periods between my sets. I just make it just a little bit harder. It feels just like you've added load.
Yeah. So tempo, rest periods, we can add load, we can increase reps. Yes, there's lots of ways to do that. I
Hmm.
just want to go back to what you said about try, the weight amounts that you have for a month and then next month move up. Is that what you like to work in is looking at sort of like a month time frame, like a 4 week set and then increase the weights or make a change in some of these techniques that we just talked about?
With seasoned lifters especially, that is
Yeah.
super effective. That is super effective because you can't expect, it's just not realistic to expect weekly changes.
Yeah.
Shoot, I'm 54 years old and I still consider myself to be pretty strong. I can't expect even like monthly progression. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Sometimes I gotta spend 2 months. I gotta spend a 12-week block with the same, basic premise and then expect to be able to move up a little bit, right? So with seasoned lifters, yeah, a month block is I would expect a month block to be noticeable in terms of improved performance.
Mhm.
Like I said, a challenging workout, execute it however it is for your frequency every week, and then in the next month, make a change, go up in load, go up in repetitions, whatever. When you're shifting to kind of more the lifter that is not as seasoned, now we can expect changes a little bit more rapidly. Now maybe we can make weekly changes here or bi-week. I say bi-weekly, but I always get it screwed up in my head. When I think of bi-weekly, I think 2 times a week. Basically
Yeah, me
every
too.
other week, every other week. Let's go 2 weeks with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then let's increase and go. So many of my coworkers here at 3D Muscle Journey, what we talk about is less on timelines and go by you've earned it. You've
Mhm.
mastered this workout. You've mastered
Mhm.
this load. You've mastered
Mhm.
this exercise with this load, and you've executed over a time period, whether that be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. In my case, like sometimes 2 and 3 months. But I've mastered it. I've earned the ability. I've earned the right, I guess you might say,
Yeah.
to put more load on there,
Right.
to do
Yeah.
more repetitions, to do another set, to add this tech. We've earned it. And now we're ready to progress. So, and the reason that we like that is it serves the masses. It doesn't serve, okay, let's go up weekly. Well, I've been training for a while. I can't really go up weekly. Well, you're
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
Likewise, I feel like I'm progressing every week. Do I really have to wait a whole month? Well, you're right. You probably are at that point in your lifting career where you can go up a little bit more often.
Hmm.
However, it is that the timeline is, it breaks those molds when you're like, I've earned it. I've mastered this, and now I've earned being able to go up, however that is.
Hmm. Our audience has heard me reference reps and reserves, how to leave,
Mm,
pushing toward failure. How many reps do we have left in the tank? Let's talk about that. I'd love to get your thoughts about how do we know we're lifting heavy enough? What does it look like? What gains can we expect to see if we're pushing toward that fatigue point? And
mhm.
what does that look like for us?
Yeah, it's amazing how mysterious reps and reserve is, but
Mhm.
yet it's so simple when you're doing it,
Mm.
when you get your hands dirty in the gym. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, I think probably in order to really grasp reps and reserved in training to failure, you have to kind of almost start with the foundation of good quality repetitions.
Mm.
So many times
Sure.
it's almost especially the more you lift, it's almost kind of a natural progression. I'm going to move a little bit with this. I'm going to kind of bounce a little bit on my curls or my laterals or whatever, just to kind of help it get moving again. And you get this almost natural movement that happens with that, which is fine and to a point, because what happens is that in our zest and our zeal for progression, we add load, now we're moving more. We add a little bit more load, now we're moving more. And what we find is that that movement that we started with, which was very subtle, is now it's actually the movement is gaining momentum with the load that it is
Mhm.
that we're trying to move, and it's the momentum that's getting it started and not the muscle anymore.
Ah, right.
And so you have to kind of almost come from a standpoint to really understand failure is you got to kind of go the other direction to like being overly strict. And this is kind of something that we've got lots of little reels on the 3D muscle journey social
Instagram.
medias
Yeah.
is that we're not really advocates of really strict kind of Nazi-ish form, but man, when you're really trying to identify failure in reps and reserve, it's almost kind of a necessary evil that you have to experiment with. So you have to experiment with the concentration curl or like the curls with your dumbbells where you've got your elbows against the wall.
Yeah.
And what you're going to experience is you're going to experience the fatigue that sets in over the course of that set. And pretty soon, as long as your technique is consistent from the previous reps, you've stuck your elbows against the wall, you're going to find you can't curl that anymore. You cannot make that dumbbell come up to your shoulder. You've just experienced failure. And
Hmm.
how simple that is in practice, but then we put a title on that. That is at that point there, it's you've failed. You've reached failure at that point. And people are like, well, what does that mean, failure? Well, when you make it as simple as that, it's kind of like, now I understand this definition of failure to what it actually is in the gym, right? We talk about zero reps in reserve. Well, if you've got your arm stuck against the wall and you're curling those dumbbells and you barely make it, and you're like trying to cheat a little bit, trying to get that is zero reps in reserve. There's without a doubt, you cannot do another repetition, right? And then of course there's the one where it's like, okay, I finished that, but boy, do I have another one? I'm not sure that I have another one. I call that zero point 0.5 repetitions in reserve. I might have one, but I don't really know for sure,
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you kind of go backwards from there. That was a tough, challenging repetition. I'm pretty sure I've got one repetition in reserve. That's that one repetition in reserve, right? And so you almost kind of have to get your hands dirty in the gym. Back up a little bit. I'm trying to figure out what this failure thing is, what it feels like, what it looks like. Well, let's make our form a little bit strict.
Hmm.
Make things such that they're very reproducible and you can almost kind of equate after the set. Wow, that last one was failure. Now I know what training to failure feels like. The one
Yeah.
before that, I barely made it. That was zero reps in reserve. The one before that, it was challenging, but obviously I had one more repetition in reserve because the next one I barely got. And then you can kind of start to equate these intuitive feelings of how, as you're doing the set,
Sure.
what that equates to in this definition of one RIR, zero RIR, or when you fail, I call that minus one RIR. You actually
Okay.
did not
Yeah, you
complete that
didn't complete it.
repetition.
Yeah. It's a really good litmus test for those listening to try what Brad said about putting your arms against the wall and doing the
Hmm.
curl because nothing else can help you. Like the
Exactly.
muscle is the only thing that can get that dumbbell up and over. Okay, go
Yep.
ahead with your second point.
Well, just to answer that second part of your question, what can we expect when we're training that hard, when we're training to failure frequently, right? It's almost a given that the harder you work, the more result you're going to get, right?
Hmm.
But there's a fine balance there because that is hard work. If your listeners try this technique, you're going to experience a burn in that muscle. And maybe you've never done that before. Maybe you've never trained that strictly to that muscular failure that is inevitably going to happen. That's challenge mentally. That is very challenging mentally to
Hmm.
push
Yeah,
your muscle to that burning point, that burning sensation all the time, right? And if you've never done that before, it's eye-opening. It's like, wow, I thought I
totally.
was training hard,
Yeah.
but I really wasn't,
Yeah.
On the flip side, if you're always doing that, it becomes this point where it's like, man, I don't feel like doing that today. That is hard to do.
Mm,
So there's this balance point to where it's like you got to pick your shots. It's kind of like
sure.
that boxer that's picking their shots of when they know they can make contact. You got to visit that, but don't live there.
How often can we visit that in a week, maybe?
Yeah,
Like with good recovery, ability to recover.
and that's actually a very good point because that's kind of a litmus test in itself of am
Mm,
I able to recover from this, right? It's kind of my opinion right now. You can live there with simple exercises, right? You can live there with curls,
the
with
basics.
your basics, yeah. Because yes, it does burn. Yes, it is hard, but maybe it's just 2 sets. Maybe it's just 3 sets, right? However, when you're talking with your complex exercises, things like rows and like we're talking about push-ups and body weight squats and, goblet squats holding your dumbbell. Now we want to visit there maybe once a month, right?
Hmm.
Because those exercises are so effective that we're getting the most bang for our buck. One loaded squat, I think I read somewhere, works like you have to use 212 muscles, right? That's a lot of bang for your buck, right?
Sure.
You're using and working a lot of muscles. So therefore, do you really want to take that one set to failure, to even one rep in reserve? That is exhausting. There, we have to kind of say to ourselves, let's not live there. Let's visit there once a block, once a month, right?
Mm. Hmm.
Otherwise, let's live 1 rep in reserve, 2 reps in reserve. Maybe it's not even identifiable where we've got these reps in reserve. It's just hard work at that point,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then we can kind of finish that with our easier exercises where we can hit, momentary muscular failure or whatever. And those ones we can visit there a little bit more frequently. And then of course, all of this stuff that it depends, right? Your beginners and your early lifters, they don't probably even have to visit that for a while.
Hmm. Yeah,
They can
for
just they
sure.
can just they can just lift,
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
seasoned veterans, now we're going to have to kind of start, integrating these kinds of things. But I kind of got off on a tangent there because it's really the results that we're after. What can we
Hmm.
expect from this, right?
Hmm.
When you're training, especially if you haven't really done that before and you're training to that kind of intensity, again, it's almost like you're revisiting newbie-ish, those adaptations that happened when you very first started lifting. And within days, you can expect to be able to handle a heavier load, right? If you haven't really trained like that, it's almost like you're revisiting those adaptations again. It's like, wow, I actually failed at 8 repetitions before, at 7.5, we'll say, and now I'm getting 10.5. That is, especially for somebody that's as seasoned as us, you see that in the course of 1 or 2 weeks,
Yeah.
that is rapid progression,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And that's a sign of two things. Number one, it's working, right? But number two, that means you're recovering because we talked about recovering and this
Hmm.
litmus. That is a test right there that you are recovering from your training because without adequate recovery, you're not going to be able to progress. And so this is kind of something that I talk about all the time. If you're able to progress, it doesn't really matter how you feel. You might feel awful, but if your repetitions are going up, you're recovering because without that ability to progress, that's a sign that you're not recovering.
Hmm.
And then maybe we just got to balance that. Maybe we just back it down just a little bit where we're visiting those failure times, maybe every other week or every other workout or whatever. But then, of course, now we can say, okay, this gets back and circles back to progressive overload. Maybe we can use a little bit heavier dumbbell. Maybe we can slow it down a little bit on the eccentric, right?
Hmm.
Make it a little bit tougher, and then we kind of start over again.
Hmm.
The visible results, right? That's the other thing that we're after is, okay, we've got the performance
Sure.
result. That's great, but how am I going to look?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where we have to be a little bit more patient, because
Yeah.
again, it depends. If you've got more body fat on you, if you've gained 8 grams of muscle on there, it might not be very noticeable.
That's true.
If you're lean, if you're arguably skinny, and you've just gained 8 grams of muscle on a particular muscle, yeah, you're
Yeah.
gonna see that,
Oh, yeah,
you
it's gonna
know.
pop. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And it may not be size, it's just, wow, I don't remember that line being right there,
Sure.
like we did before. That's muscular growth right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the nice thing is that regardless, if we see it or if we don't, we can always circle back to how am I performing? Am I
Hmm.
able to progress?
Hmm.
I Those are the signs that yeah, it's working.
Okay. That's great. Excellent advice there. I want to finish just with a short conversation here about lifting for longevity. We have heard, and this has gone around in social media, I'm sure you've seen it, but that we need good grip strength. So we need to be doing the dead hang, we need to be doing the farmer's carries. And I think a lot of people maybe don't understand that the reason why people have good grip strength is because they have been training for years and years and years, which is a proxy for better health, all the internal benefits that we get. What's the benefit of that? Should we be hanging and doing the farmer's carries? I know they're beneficial for other things, but I'd love you just to bring some nuance to that conversation here.
Listen, yeah, yeah. You know what? I have to apologize to both you and your listeners because I saw in our lead up to this call that you were talking about this grip strength, and I was meant to go do some research on it, and I forgot. I
Oh, that's
completely
okay.
forgot about it. But I do have other ways
Yeah.
that I would kind of like to discuss. But before I do that, the grip strength, right? I don't know if you or your listeners are familiar with Jan Todd, but Jan is a
Mm.
female she was arguably the strongest female lifter of the 70s. And Jan now, if you look at her, you would think that's an elderly lady. You know what I mean? She's actually the curator and the manager of the museum in Austin, Texas,
Mm.
of the Museum of Physical Culture. And I geeked out when I went there because she has gotten, I mean, everything in there from like the early days of wagon wheel pushing through the 70s when there was the Olympic lifting was super popular. She was a power lifter and Olympic lifter. And now she is actually the organizer of the Rogue events, the Rogue Invitational for CrossFit athletes, the Rogue
Oh, cool.
Strongman competitions, Strongwomen
Hmm.
competitions. But I will never forget when I met Jan Todd. You're looking at this elderly lady. She reaches out, she shakes my hand, and I mean to tell you, Tracy, this elderly lady had an incredible grip,
Oh, I
an
bet.
incredible grip.
I
And
bet.
you know it was from all those years of
Hmm.
lifting that she
Hmm.
did.
Hmm.
And even though she looks elderly, she's still a strong lady that, I mean, I don't know if she still trains. I don't know if she's still strong, but man, this gal has a work ethic. She's working in that museum hours and hours and hours a day, walking around that museum. They've got stuff in the back that they're cataloging and they're curating. And we're talking about she had these 45, pound plates that were used by so and so back and she's moving these 45-pound plates and these kettlebells and all these implements of strength. That's a product of all those years of training that she did.
Hmm.
So now, since I'm not prepared on the grip strength thing, for me, it all boils down to posture. You know,
Hmm.
Posture is so important, and lifting is so important for posture because,
Yeah.
I mean, as we all know, maybe some of your listeners that are kind of new, we're losing muscle every day.
Yeah.
This is what is the term for it? Help me out, Tracy. It's called
Sarcopenia.
sarcopenia. There you
Yeah.
go. We're
Mm-hmm.
getting older, we're losing muscle every single day. So our natural tendency is to just kind of curl up into a ball, right? And so posture and training, like you said, with that farmer's walk, right? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we're not only training the hands and the grip strength here, but you're fighting having that weight that you're doing the farmer's walk with pulling you downward and into this curled up position. You've
Sure.
got to use those muscles in order to keep upright, keep your
Sure.
chest up, keep your shoulders back and down. Jen Todd's got fantastic posture. She does
Mm-hmm.
not curled up,
Mm-hmm.
into a ball. But posture to me is not only a sign, it's almost kind of like I don't want to see a guarantee because there's no guarantees in life. But when
Mm-hmm.
you've got when you've got good posture, your organs are not getting crushed. Your
Yeah,
lungs are not
it's a
being
good edge to have for sure.
exactly. And everything that's inside of your body is going to benefit
Yeah.
from being upright. So often people think of our spine as kind of like, okay, it's this thing that our bodies are sitting on. But really our spine is kind of like it's kind of a chain of pearls that's sitting in between and supported with our muscles, and they kind of work in conjunction.
Mm-hmm.
And when you've got the musculature to be able to let that hang like a chain of pearls, now we've kind of got this synergy where the rib cage is staying open and it allows the lungs to expand. It's giving room for our heart to beat. The ribs are staying apart
Sure.
from the pelvis, and it's got room for our organs that not get squished and things like that. Posture, I think it was something that I read way back in the day that people with good posture, the timeline of their life, it kind of continues to go up and up and up and up and up until the day they die, and then it just kind of falls off. You know what I mean? As opposed to the opposite, people that are slowly curling up into a ball, they kind of, first of all, they kind of peak much earlier, and then it's just a slow decline until they
Yeah.
kind of have that day of reckoning, right? And
Mhm.
so I kind of use posture kind of like with you in that grip strength. It's a sign, it's a longevity kind of test.
Mm-hmm.
Those
For
with
sure.
good posture, they have better qualities of life, and they're probably
Yeah.
going to live a lot longer until that
Yeah.
day of reckoning comes. Then one day we're here, we're gone the next.
That's right. That's right. Well, that is excellent. Thank you, Brad, for all of this advice today. I'm sure our listeners are going to take a lot of what you said about that progressive overload specifically and implement that into their workouts. Women who are listening, I really want you to do that because that is how we're going to grow. Brad, where can people follow you on social media?
Um, as I mentioned before, I'm part of 3D Muscle Journey, and really, to be honest with you, if you just type up 3D Muscle Journey Team 3D MJ, you're
Uh-huh.
going to find us everywhere. We're
That's
on
right.
Instagram, we're on YouTube, we're on TikTok, we're on Facebook. And that's really what I feel like people will gain the most
For
benefit, the
sure.
most knowledge, because now we're talking just not me, not just one mind, but this almost community of minds and
What a
coaches.
team. Hmm.
Exactly, that it's almost like this hive of knowledge that happens there. But yeah, me specifically, just 3DMJ coach. Team
Perfect.
3DMJ, 3DMJ coach. That's where you're going to find me on Instagram, on X, and on
Hmm.
YouTube. That's where they can find me specifically. But
Okay.
I'm going to stay humble and say if you really want to get the gains, the brain gains,
There you
go to
go.
Team 3DMJ.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today. This was a great conversation, one that I will revisit and use in our workouts as well. So thank you so much.
Yes, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me on, Tracy. It was an honor.
And now to all of you, go move daily in your fitness, your wellness, and nutrition. And we'll see you all in the next Move Daily Talks.